Hey everyone, my name is Mirai and welcome to the general MMORPG setup video for ISBoxer 42. Now before getting started, I would suggest checking both the description of this video as well as the ISBoxer Wiki to see if there's a more specific setup video or written guide for the game that you're playing, since this is only a generic setup guide and some games do require a more detailed set of instructions. In addition to that, if at any time you find yourself stuck during the setup process, then I suggest that you visit the ISBoxer forum or Discord for further support. Finally, this is a longer video, and because of that, there is a table of contents that can be found in the video description that will allow you to navigate to the different areas of the video, as not all of it may be relevant to what you're configuring. So, with that said, let's get started. First, check to see if the game has been added to Interspace by right-clicking on the crosshairs icon next to the system clock. If your game is not listed at the top, then add the game. But if the game is already showing, then you can ignore this next step. This pop-up is where you'll name your game, point Interspace at the executable file used to launch the game, and fill in any parameters you may need or want. And if you have no idea what a parameter is, then you can probably ignore it, although some games do require them. When it comes to adding in this information, you can simply drag and drop the desktop shortcut or game executable onto this area, and the information will be filled in for you automatically. I will note that if the game you're playing requires the use of a launcher, then the launcher should be added here in place of the game's executable file. But if you're already using the desktop shortcut, then you probably don't have to worry about it. When that's done, hit OK and move into ISBoxer. Once in ISBoxer, you can start the Quick Setup wizard from the Wizards menu up top. This wizard will walk you through several steps to help configure ISBoxer for the type of game that you're looking to multibox. Everything it creates can be set up without it, but for anyone other than the most advanced users, the Quick Setup wizard is strongly recommended. Once you're on step 1, pick the game that you're playing from the dropdown, and if the game that you're playing isn't listed, then just choose Other at the bottom. The reason for this initial step is that ISBoxer sometimes adjusts certain settings based upon the game that you're playing, but it isn't always necessary, which is why there's an Other option. On step 2, you can begin adding characters to your team by filling in the fields on the right. ISBoxer may have detected some existing characters on your computer or from your current profile. If it did, then you will find them in the large box on the left-hand side, and you can use them if you so choose. If it didn't, then no big deal. Again, just fill in the necessary fields on the right. Now, there are two fields in particular that you will want to ensure are populated with the correct information, the game and game profile fields, and in these dropdowns, you should see the game that you recently added to Interspace. If you don't see it listed here, then the game may have been improperly added, and I would suggest reviewing the initial section of this video that shows how to add a game, or seeking further support on the ISBoxer support channels, as you cannot move beyond this step if those fields are left blank. In addition, if you find that you have multiple game profiles to choose from, then the choice is yours. Sometimes Interspace will create multiple profiles for a game when it has multiple ways to launch it, but most games will show only one profile. On step 3, give your team a name. It may help to choose something descriptive since you may end up having multiple teams, but I'm just going to use a generic name for the video. On step 4, pick a layout for your game windows. The drop-down at the top has a bunch of presets, and there are some options along the right-hand side for you to play with if you'd like. Normally, for beginners, I'd recommend just leaving those alone for now and going with a basic layout from the drop-down, but I'll mention 2 bits of information. First, in my opinion, a layout that utilizes the Leave a Hole option will help new players when first starting off, because it's easier to tell which game client you're playing from. So, if you'd like, set the Leave a Hole option to True, and then pick a layout from the top drop-down. Adjusting any option on the right will refresh the list of available choices in the top dropdown, and if you specifically select True or False, then those choices will either always include or exclude that particular setting. Otherwise, both options get mixed in and you can freely choose whichever you'd like. Second, your game may require a layout that uses video effects, which is a feature of ISBoxer. If you're having issues with your game clients rendering properly, then try setting the Use Video Effects option to True, and then create a new, non-existing layout. Additional information about video effects layouts can be found on the ISBoxer Wiki. On step 5 is where you're going to set some performance options, and honestly, the defaults on this page are likely going to be just fine. But if you're afraid that your machine might not perform all that well when trying to run multiple game clients, then feel free to drop the background and or foreground frame rates down a little bit, but not too low, because a low frame rate could easily cause unwanted effects. In addition to that, for the best performance, I do recommend setting the CPU strategy to select all CPUs with every window, although you may find that another option performs better for you on your computer. Nothing you choose here is set in stone, and you have the ability to change this at any time using the CPU strategy wizard, so don't worry if you get it wrong. On step 6 is where you configure some of the core functionality for your team, and while most of this can be left as default, there are a few things to talk about. Now, before getting started here, I will suggest that you leave any pre-assigned keybinds as their default setting, not only here in the wizard, but all throughout ISBoxer, at least for right now. I'll be referring back to some of them throughout the remainder of this video, and it might be confusing to hear me talk about how to activate a certain feature with a certain set of keys that you've already changed, but now you can't remember what you changed them to. However, you can change any hotkey in ISBoxer to anything you want at any point after the wizard. So right at the top are the general hotkeys, and there are 3 different entries that are assigned a hotkey by default. Toggle broadcasting, which allows you to toggle on or off the ability to broadcast your entire keyboard and mouse to all of your game clients. For MMORPGs, this is normally only enabled when you want to interact with something in the game world, be it an NPC, a gathering node, or something similar, and broadcasting should not be enabled when trying to move your entire team around in a 3D world. Then there's toggle key maps and menus, which is used more or less to pause the multiboxing software so that you can use the keyboard and or mouse freely without your other characters receiving keys and performing in-game actions while you try to type. And then the ISBoxer GUI toggle is used to toggle ISBoxer's in-game GUI. The in-game GUI gives you access to some features of ISBoxer, but it's unlikely you'll be using this anytime soon, so I wouldn't worry too much about this one. Now, the section below this handles the basic broadcasting of 1 through equals on your keyboard's number row, and this just means that you're telling ISBoxer that you want to broadcast those keys to all of your game clients. If you also use the modifier keys along with 1 through equals, then you can check the applicable boxes to add those as well, and ISBoxer will set them up for you. In addition to the basic setup of 1 through equals, you can add even more keys by using the mapped key wizard at any time after this initial quick setup wizard, and more information about that can be found on the ISBoxer Wiki. Now, if you're someone who would rather click the buttons on the action bar rather than use a keybind, then you can enable the action bar overlay option. I won't be talking too much about this other than how to place it over your bars in-game, but there is separate documentation on the ISBoxer Wiki linked below. Finally, I would also suggest not enabling Auto Assist or Auto Interact, as most games either don't handle these properly, or, in the case of Interact, don't even have the function to begin with, so it's best to leave those both disabled when first starting out. Now below that, there is the MMO Party Mechanics section, and there is a bit to cover here. So because this is a general setup video, I'm only going to talk about the 2 most basic ways to follow an assist. In order for you to make a decision on which version you should be using, you're going to need to understand what is and isn't available in the game that you're playing, and in addition, you're going to have to do some manual setup on your own. ISBoxer is not automatic, and it can't possibly know certain things about your game unless you give it that information. But even then, it's still blind to most everything. ISBoxer is not a bot. It cannot read your game client, and therefore you have to set up things like macros and keybinds, and everything that happens in-game while multiboxing is a key press that comes from you on one of your input devices attached to your computer. So now that I got that out of the way, I'm going to talk about 2 different follow and assist modes from this dropdown, but first I'd like to quickly address the 2 subsections below this. On the left is the hotkeys section, and these are the hotkeys, or ISBoxer keybinds, if you will, that you will be physically pressing to send certain keys to the game, while the ISBoxer keymaps toggle is enabled. To the right is the game keybinding section, and this is where you would assign the keys that you're using in-game to perform these particular actions. And the layout of this section may change slightly based upon the follow and assist mode that you choose. So let's talk about them. For most games, the directly follow and assist designated main character option is going to work just fine, and from here on forward, I'm just going to call this method 1. Now, this method requires that your game has some sort of macro system where you can create both a follow and assist macro for your lead character specifically, and then assign a key binding to those macros by placing them on your action bar on each of your followers. Those two keybinds for the in-game follow and assist macros that you're going to create are what you would assign in these two fields here, follow main character and assist main character. And for the sake of demonstration, I'm going to set these to F7 and F8. I would further suggest keeping these assignments to just single, unmodified keys because some games are finicky when it comes to using modifiers. Now, it's okay if you don't know what these assignments are right at this moment in time, as I'll show where to set them up outside of the wizard so that you can come back after you've configured everything in-game. On the other hand, if your game does not have a macro system, but it has built-in keybinds for both follow and assist, as well as a way to target party members with a keybind, then you can select the target current slot, then follow and assist target option. We'll call this method 2. Now, selecting this method should kick you down to what I like to call the F key targeting grid, but if it doesn't, then you can simply scroll down and it should be filled in for you automatically. Targeting party members in MMOs is generally done through the F keys above your keyboard's number row, and if your game uses a different set of keys to target party members, then you would enter those into this grid instead. In addition, whichever keys those in-game follow and assist actions are bound to would need to be assigned in these two fields under the Game Key Bindings subsection, Follow Target and Assist Target. And as before, for the sake of demonstration, I'm going to set these to F9 and F10. My prior recommendation applies here as well. Use of single unmodified keys is preferable. Again, you don't need to have this information readily available right at this very moment, but you should know which follow and assist method is compatible with your game. However, if they're both compatible, then I would personally recommend the first method since it's simpler to use. So at this point, we're done with the wizard, and we'll talk more about both of these methods while I introduce several areas of ISBoxer to help get you started. I am going to move fairly quickly through some of this, so I suggest that you either rewatch the areas of the video that may be confusing, or simply visit the ISBoxer Wiki for further information, or the forum and Discord to ask questions. Now, in ISBoxer, the general workflow is that you'll click on something in the upper left pane, which will normally populate the lower left pane with information, and if there's something to click on down there, clicking on it will then populate the lower right pane with additional information as well. There are a lot of settings in ISBoxer, and it can seem overwhelming, but you'll probably only use a fraction of them until you have a better understanding of the program itself, and that is entirely expected. Now, the two main areas of ISBoxer that you should be familiar with from the start are key maps and character sets, but we'll also touch on a few others. In the key maps section, you can click on any key map to see the list of mapped keys that it contains, and to the right of the map key itself is the hotkey that it uses. A hotkey, as mentioned earlier, is like an ISBoxer key binding, and it's the key or button used to execute a mapped key. Always On, base hotkeys, combat broadcast hotkeys, and the custom hotkeys key maps are where you'll normally be setting all of your hotkeys, and the other key maps can be left alone since they're mostly used for controlling things. Now, as an example, the hotkey used in order to get your characters to follow your main is, by default, Alt-F. You can see that right here. You can change this to something different by simply clicking on the mapped key and adjusting the hotkey over in the bottom right pane. However, as I previously mentioned, I recommend leaving everything as default for now so that you can better follow along with not only what I'll be talking about, but what some other guides may be referring to as well. Now, mapped keys aren't magic, and they do have some underlying actions. If you want to see which actions a mapped key is comprised of, then you can expand the mapped key and select a step, and this will reveal the actions that it contains. If you right-click on the word Actions at the top of this area, you can see a list of actions that ISBoxer has available, and there are about 40 of them. If you're interested in what these actions are capable of, then there's plenty of documentation about them, which can be found on the ISBoxer Wiki. Now, if we have a quick look at the Combat Broadcast Hotkeys key map, we can see that the ISBoxer wizard has already set up 1 through equals with additional modifiers. These were tied to the options we just saw a moment ago on the final step of the wizard. If you chose not to add the hotkeys for the modified keys during the wizard, but now you want to, you would simply select the mapped key, and again, assign a hotkey over in this area. Keep in mind that we're in Combat Broadcast Hotkeys and not Combat Broadcast. Remember, you should not be assigning hotkeys inside of key maps that do not contain the word hotkeys in their name, or, unless you have a very specific reason to, always on. Finally, to repeat what I said earlier, if you want to set up additional mapped keys for something other than 1 through equals, you would use the mapped key wizard for that. Now that's all I wanted to mention about key maps and mapped keys, so let's move on to character sets. Under the character sets section is where your teams reside. When selecting a particular character set, you can see there is a list of slot numbers assigned to each of the characters you recently added. This is the order in which you will want to log your characters into the game, and deviating from this is something that can cause core functionality to break, since character set slots launch in numerical order, and ISBoxer expects that each slot is going to contain the character listed here. As I said earlier, ISBoxer doesn't know anything beyond what you tell it, and in this list is where you're telling it which characters belong to each slot. Now, if you click on a slot number, you can see there are some slot-specific settings listed here. Each slot has a key combination assigned to it that will allow you to press it in order to switch to that window. The default is Control-Alt-Number, where number is the slot number you'd like to swap to. However, if you have an Alt-GR key and you told ISBoxer that on the final step of the wizard, then these slot swap hotkeys will be unassigned, and you will have to assign them to something else if you want to use them. There's also a performance tab under each slot of your character set, and I'll just quickly mention that this can be used to set the foreground and background frame rates, as well as the CPU core assignment for that particular slot. However, I will recommend that you use the CPU strategy wizard located under the wizard's menu if you're simply making a blanket change across all of the slots of your character set. In addition to this, there is also a variable keystrokes tab, which contains a portion of the F key targeting grid we saw earlier in the wizard when choosing method 2 for the follow and assist setup. It's only a portion of the full grid because it only covers the particular slot we have selected, whereas the grid we saw on the final step of the quick setup wizard was for the entire team of characters. So if you've pushed beyond the wizard and you want to make changes to the entire F key targeting grid, then you would do that by selecting a slot, making those changes, moving to the next slot, making those changes there, and so on and so forth. Now, if we move back to the general settings of the character set, there's a quality of life setting that I like to point out to new users. Mute background game window audio is a setting that I will recommend you enable if you don't want to hear sound from all of your game windows at once, and if your game doesn't already include such an option in its own settings. Finally, while we're still looking at the general settings of the character set, we'll move over to the Virtual Mapped Keys tab. Here, you'll see a list of mapped keys that are being virtualized, and for the sake of simplification, all that means is that they're being used as sort of a configuration menu for your character set. Now, at the bottom of the list, you'll see the Follow Me and Assist Me active methods, and in my case, they're assigned to the Follow Main and Assist Main single keybind, which is actually method 1. If you need to adjust the follow and assist methods you're using, maybe you just arbitrarily chose one to push past the wizard with the intention of changing it later, or maybe your game requires method 1 for follow and method 2 for assist. In that case, in the column on the right, simply click on the less than sign next to the entry to bring up the mapped key picker. In the mapped key dropdown, you can see there is a list of available choices for both follow and assist. Again, I'm currently assigned to the single keybind method, method 1, but if you want to switch to method 2, the target slot method, then make the change and hit OK. Finally, and this should go without saying, do not assign an assist method to the follow entry, and vice versa. Alright, so next we can jump down to the main variable keystroke section and take a look at what's down here. Now, I know I just showed you the variable keystrokes tab under each slot of the character set, but those tabs only dealt with those particular slots, whereas this section deals with settings that affect all of your character sets. So right at the top are some movement keys. If you use something other than WASD to move and Q and E to strafe, then change those here. These are generally used for the formations found in the base hotkeys key map, but can be used for other things as well. Right below those, we come to follow target and assist target, and these are assigned to F9 and F10, the two keys I assigned during the wizard when setting up method 2. Then there's also follow main and assist main listed a little further down, and they're using F7 and F8, the same keys I assigned during the wizard when setting up method 1. So regardless of whichever method you chose, if you need to make an adjustment to either of these, this area is where you would do that. Follow target and assist target are used for method 2, and follow main and assist main are used for method 1. Okay, so that's all the major stuff I wanted to talk about before moving on, but I will suggest that you continue to look around throughout the different areas of ISBoxer to see what's hidden there. Again, it may be daunting simply because there are so many settings, but as I said before, you probably won't be using a vast majority of them unless you begin building a more advanced setup. Now, every time you make a change in ISBoxer, you will need to export its settings over to Innerspace in order for them to take effect, and that is what we need to do right now before we can move forward. So, go to File, and choose to Export. If ISBoxer prompts you with recommending changes about frame rates, windowed modes, or anything like that, I would suggest agreeing to them as it's just trying to enforce some compatibility settings. Now, after you've successfully exported, you can right-click on the Innerspace crosshairs icon in the notification area and launch your character set. Generally, when it comes to launching games, there are one of two ways to do this. If your game uses a launcher, then you will be greeted with one and only one launcher upon loading your character set. At this point, you will need to log into the account for the character set slot in which you're launching. Remember, they launch in numerical order. Then start the game and completely shut down the launcher. A second launcher will then appear, enter the next account's credentials, start the game, and completely shut down the launcher. Repeat this for each character in your character set until it is fully launched. This process may seem a bit tedious, but this is the way that it is. However, if your game's launcher stores your login information in a file on your computer, then you might be able to set up a virtual file through ISBoxer to help speed up the login process. Also, I must stress that the game's launcher needs to be completely shut down between each slot that launches, otherwise it breaks both your character set and window layout. So ensure that your game's launcher isn't minimizing to the taskbar or notification area, and that it is completely shutting down before the next one appears. Now, on the other hand, if you can launch your game directly without the use of a launcher, then each game should load up and move into its position of your window layout. Once all character set slots have launched, you can then log into each of the game clients. But before doing so, I would suggest that you disable key maps by pressing Shift-Alt-M or by clicking the left menu button on the overlay in the corner of your game window. As I previously mentioned, disabling key maps pauses ISBoxer, which then allows you to type freely without it interfering. The reason you don't have to do this if your game uses a launcher is because ISBoxer is not active while on the launcher. Now, after you have all of your characters in-game, there are several different things you will need to set up and ensure are working properly. When first entering the game world with your characters, you'll want to ensure that key maps are enabled and the repeater is disabled. The state of these are reflected in the overlay in the upper left. Repeater, also known as broadcasting, is toggled on and off by pressing Shift-Alt-R, R for repeater, or by clicking the right menu button on the overlay in the corner. If you can see a mouse cursor in all of your game windows, then repeater is enabled, and it should not be for normal gameplay. Broadcasting is normally only used when you want all of your characters to simultaneously interact with something in the game, be it an NPC, dialogue panes, adjusting your UI settings, etc., and attempting to move your characters in-game in a 3D world with repeater enabled will result in nothing short of disappointment, but you're more than welcome to try it out yourself if you're curious. When multiboxing a game that takes place in a 3D world, multiboxers rely on the follow command to move their team around in the game. I'll also mention again that key maps are toggled on or off by default with Shift-Alt-M, that's M for key maps, or by clicking the left menu button on the overlay in the corner. Disabling key maps essentially pauses ISBoxer's hotkeys that may be assigned to keys on your keyboard that you may want to use for typing, whether it's when speaking to other players, entering your password upon login, or whatever else. However, you will want to ensure that key maps are enabled during normal gameplay so that ISBoxer can broadcast its mapped keys and underlying actions to your characters. For example, key maps will need to be enabled for basic functions such as follow and assist to work correctly after you've properly set them up. So now that we've covered the toggles for key maps and repeater, you will want to invite your characters into a party, and there are two different ways that you might go about this, either by right-clicking on the character portraits or by writing a macro. Now, if your game does have the ability to create an invite macro, then in-game create said macro, assign it to a button on your action bar, and give it a key binding. Then, in ISBoxer, under the variable keystroke section, assign a key combination to invite team. This key combination must match the key that you assign to your macro in-game. Finally, in the base hotkeys key map, assign a hotkey to the invite team mapped key if one isn't already assigned. The quick setup wizard may have assigned Shift-Alt-I, and you can change this if you'd like, but this will be the key that you will physically press in order for ISBoxer to execute your invite macro. After all of that is complete, export your settings to Interspace and test this out by pressing the hotkey on the character where you created the invite macro. Now, if you chose the target slot method for follow and assist, that's method 2, then you will need to create your party in accordance with the order of the slots within your character set, which is generally referred to as inviting in slot order. This means that you would want to send out any invites from the character that resides in slot 1 of your character set, and then accept those invites in the remaining order. So after sending out the invites from slot 1, accept on the character in slot 2, then accept on the character in slot 3, and so on for the remainder of your party. In most games, this will enforce a specific party order, which is for the most part required when targeting party members with the F keys. It's not crucial that you do this if you're using method 1 for follow and assist, but it is if you're using method 2. So right now, I'm going to give a quick rundown on how you'd go about setting up the 2 different follow and assist methods that have been repeatedly talked about up to this point. However, if you're already clear on how this works, then feel free to skip this section, but this will be a full exploded view breakdown, and this information is available in an image linked in the description down below. Now, for in-game follow and assist, you'll need to know whether your game allows you to write macros or set keybinds for these 2 functions, or whether you'll need to utilize both to fully set this up. For method 1, this single keybind method, you're writing macros, and for method 2, the target slot method, you're setting in-game keybinds. For the follow and assist macros, they should be set up similar to the examples you're seeing on screen, but the names of these commands or the way that they're accessed may vary depending on your game. Likewise, sometimes follow and assist are available as keybinds, but can be cryptically labeled. For example, in Final Fantasy XIV, the in-game assist keybind is labeled as target the target of your current target. Now, technically, that is exactly what an assist is, and to be fair, they do list assist target right next to it, but you may find that your game also labels these functions oddly. Now, the method 1 macros should use the character's name that you expect to be leading from, which is likely going to be the character in slot 1 of your character set. The macros will also need to be created on all of your non-lead characters, because they are the ones who will be following and assisting your lead. Naturally, you will need some way to access these macros, so they'll need to be placed on the action bars of your followers and given an in-game keybinding. My example keybinds that I used during the quick setup wizard for method 1 were F7 and F8, and of course F9 and F10 for method 2. You can use the same keys if they don't conflict with anything in your game, or you can change them to something else, but again, I recommend keeping them to single keys without modifiers. Now, ISBoxer will need to know what these keybinds are, and the assignments for those are located in the main variable keystrokes section. Follow main and assist main are used for method 1, and follow target and assist target are used for method 2. And you can see how they're tied to the options in the wizard as well. Now, in addition to these variable keystrokes, the assignments for which follow and assist methods are currently being used are located under the Virtual Mapped Keys tab of your character set. Again, single keybind is method 1, and target slot is method 2. If you're unfamiliar with how to adjust these fields, then please review the earlier section of this video where I do cover that, but to reiterate, you can mix and match these if necessary. Now, method 2 users have an extra step where they will be relying on a way to target party members, and as mentioned before, this is normally done through the F keys. The F key party target assignments can be found on the slot-specific variable keystrokes tab located under each slot of the character set. The quick setup wizard will have populated this information for you based off the standard party order that most games use when inviting in slot order, which was discussed in the previous section of this video. So there's likely no need to adjust these at this time, but if you find that the order of your party members changes or your game doesn't rely on the standard party order, then you may need to update the F key targeting grid under one or more slots to reflect that change. Finally, the hotkeys used for both follow and assist are assigned to 2 mapped keys stored in the base hotkeys key map, and these are the keys you'll be pressing for ISBoxer to execute these actions in-game. Now, after all of that is set up, I do suggest testing it out, but before you can begin testing, ensure that you've exported from ISBoxer and that your key maps are enabled, otherwise none of this will work properly. For follow, simply press Alt-F from your lead character, and your other characters should follow them. For assist, first target something on your main, and then press the Alt-A assist hotkey. Your other characters should pick up the same target. From here, you'd either want to interact with the NPC you're targeting or begin attacking a hostile unit by using one of the keys that ISBoxer's wizard set up for you. Those are 1 through equals on your keyboard's number row with optional modifiers. Likewise, if you need to set up additional keys, then you can do so using the mapped key wizard. So that's it for setting up follow and assist, and if at this point you're running into any issues, then I would suggest seeking support on either the ISBoxer forum or Discord, and again, there is a high definition image of this exploded view breakdown available in the video description down below. So at this point, we're pretty much done with the basics, but there are a few additional aspects to multiboxing that I would like to quickly address before bringing this to a close. When wanting to interact with NPCs, such as quest givers or shop owners, you have several options. First, the most basic method is to simply switch between your game windows and interact with the NPC one character at a time. A second method is to pull up alongside the NPC with your team, enable repeater with Shift-Alt-R or through the on-screen menu button, line up your cursors over the target, and then interact with the NPC by clicking on them. An optional third method may be available if your game offers some sort of interact command. Some games do implement it, but others do not. However, if yours does, then swing by the ISBoxer forum or Discord since different games may require different setups to take advantage of it. If you opted to use the action bar overlay menu during the quick setup wizard, then it will be visible near the upper left of the game window. This is its default starting position, and there are 2 ways to reposition it. The most basic method is to, first, open up the ISBoxer in-game GUI using Ctrl-Shift-Alt-G, which will unlock all ISBoxer GUI elements and allow them to be dragged via their title bar. After that, simply click, hold, and drag the now exposed title bar of the overlay menu to the preferred location of your game window. Next, press the Sync button on the title bar of the overlay menu to sync its position to the remainder of your game windows. Then, click on the Save All Menu Positions button on the Menus tab of the in-game GUI to save all menu elements to their respective positions for this entire character set. And finally, close out of the in-game GUI using the same keyboard shortcut as before. Alternatively, you can adjust the default starting position for any particular menu inside of ISBoxer, which will avoid the need to repeatedly reposition the overlay for all future character sets, as saving through the in-game GUI only saves the element positions for that one specific character set. However, saving through the in-game GUI does also override the position defined in ISBoxer. Now, if the overlay menu needs to be resized in order to better fit over your in-game action bar properly, then the properties of the menu itself can be found in the menus template in ISBoxer, and the most used options are highlighted on screen. Menus can also be removed from or added to your character set via the Menus node found in the lower left pane of the character set for which you'd like to adjust. And on a final note, the overlay menus by default send keystrokes, not mouse clicks. The keystrokes that they send can be found in the button set assigned to the menu, and all standard wizard-generated overlay menus are designed to send 1 through equals with optional modifiers. If you wish to alter this behavior, then you will need to adjust the menu settings, but unfortunately that is beyond the scope of this tutorial, as menus can be quite complex depending on what you want, and further information about them can be found on the ISBoxer Wiki, forum, or Discord. Finally, I would just like to say that each game has its own nuances and limitations when it comes to multiboxing. Most of the time, these are either completely ignored or easily dealt with when playing solo, but become painstakingly apparent when beginning to multibox. Some of these can likely be overcome with practice, but unfortunately sometimes they cannot, and each game is unique in the challenges that it may present to a multiboxer. Multiboxing also requires a good bit of setup, management, and at times critical thinking on your part, especially when getting started. But with practice and understanding, it will only get easier over time. And when you finally reach that stage, you may find that multiboxing is more satisfying than playing solo. So at this point, here is where I leave you. It's up to you to venture forth into the world as a brand new multiboxer with the basic knowledge you've learned from this video. I suggest that you not only continue to explore ISBoxer, but refer to the ISBoxer Wiki as well as seek support on the proper channels when necessary. With that said, thank you for watching. Again, my name is Mirai, and for any further questions, comments, or concerns, please visit the ISBoxer forum or Discord over at isboxer.com.